Hello and welcome to lesson number 1. Jack Gately and welcome. This is lesson number 1 for our 8 segments of recorded lessons that are part of your live webinar to receive your license. Remember that I, the licensed instructor, Jack Gately, are always here even when you're watching the videos. We are here, so if you do have a question, use the webinar software to raise your hand figuratively, and we'll pause the video and answer your question. And if I'm not here, a licensed instructor is always here on the webinar. So thank you for coming. Again, my name is Jack Gately. I'm a real estate broker here in Massachusetts. I'm the owner of Jack Gately Real Estate and the owner of the Real Estate School. So when we're starting off on lesson 1, we're going to start some basics talking about property ownership, and then we're going to get into some significant details thereafter. We have this fancy pen tool, which is very exciting. I think it allows a lot more interaction, so you're just not hearing my voice, but actually you can see and my thoughts as I go along, and we'll be using that to demonstrate some of these concepts during the day. So let's erase the board real quick and start off with some concepts that we have to learn for property ownership lesson number 1. And I think the first thing that we have to just say to start with is obviously we have 2 types of property. We have real property, which is commonly known as real estate. Of course, that was pretty easy, right, class? And we have personal property. These are 2 different things, completely different things. We'll draw a line in between the 2 of them so that you understand that they're different. Personal property is completely different than real estate. Real estate is something that's permanently affixed or immovable, where personal property, like the phone that you're listening to this webinar on, or the computer that you're listening to the webinar on, is movable, and it's personal. So that's the distinct difference between one and the other. You probably already knew that. Sometimes we call real estate, sometimes we'll call it realty. That might be another word that you're seeing out there. Real property, that's another word that you see out there. And of course, sometimes we call personal property, sometimes we'll call that chattel. Did I spell that right? I am an awful speller, but I think we got that one spelt right for you today. So there are 2 different types of property: personal property and real estate. And of course, we have to remember that real property is affixed and immovable, and personal property is obviously movable. Interestingly enough, that occasionally you could take, and again, we won't depend upon my drawing very well, but if you took a tree is going to be what? Real estate. But if you cut the tree down into little segments like this, now you've created firewood. Yeah, that's right. You've created a little firewood, and firewood is obviously movable, and therefore it is personal property. So it's very possible to have some real estate, like a tree that we see here, and chop it down and cut it up into firewood, and we've converted it from real estate into personal property. You can also go from personal property, like if you had a bundle of lumber and you made it into a bookshelf. Not my best drawing here. You made it into a bookshelf in a built-in cabinet in your house. So when it arrived at your house in the driveway as a bundle of lumber, it was personal property. But when you created that bookshelf and permanently affixed it into the wall, maybe you built it in and screwed it into the wall, then you've converted the personal property into real estate. So it can go both ways. And, you know, I see this as to be a very, very important issue from a practical point of view, not only just for the exam, because many issues that result in disputes later on in the real estate transaction can often rotate around whether or not something was included in the sale because it was real estate, or something that was not included in the sale because it was personal property. Let's take you another example here. So this is a popular kitchen appliance. I hope that you can guess it. It's got a handle here and it's got a handle here. This is obviously a refrigerator, and a refrigerator is attached to the wall by a cord, and there it is. There's your cord. Not bad. And of course, a personal property, this is going to be temporarily installed because it is only plugged in. But if you have one of these types of refrigerators that has an ice maker to it, then aside from the cord, it also probably has a copper tube that leads out from the back of the refrigerator and is plumbed into the plumbing of the house, and therefore technically you could make a very strong argument that the refrigerator, the entire refrigerator, is permanently affixed because it has an ice maker with copper plumbing. So these are very, very important items to be mindful as you're moving through your real estate career, not only for the exam but for real life too. So when we look at the three broad categories that are involved with real estate, we obviously have the land itself. Okay, so just like the realtor motto, under all is land, we have the land itself. Then we have this other fancy French word, and I'm going to spell it out here. I'll try to spell it slowly for you. It's appurtenance. Appurtenance. Let's see. There we go. U-R-E-N-A-N-C-E-S. Appurtenance. Ooh, I think there's a T in there somewhere. Yes, there is. The T belongs right here. Yep. Appurtenances. Now, these are going to be certain items that go with the land. Oftentimes, there are rights that go with the land, or interests that are tied to the land itself. They run with the land. Sometimes you'll hear that particular example. This would be a perfect example. Would be one of these perfect examples would be an easement. An easement, the right to travel over the land of another. Even though you don't own the other person's land, you have the right to, for instance, travel over it to get to perhaps a piece of water or to share a driveway, that type of thing. And then, of course, there are things that are affixed to the land, like the buildings and everything that's in the building, trees, the roots of trees, certain fixtures. We'll talk about those in a minute. So, and that's going to be things that are attached, Ooh, look at that. We goofed it up. Let's pause no, let's not pause. We'll just hit delete, and we'll zip that up again. There we go. So let's write those things down again. We had land. We had appurtenance. Oop, forgot the T again. Look at that. And we had things. There we go. Things. So things, very important and broad category of real estate property in which is attached to the land. That's going to be your trees, anything embedded in the land, walls, anything resting upon the land, such as your buildings, any type of fixtures. Well, not all your fixtures, but anything that's naturally attached to the land. Let's go back real quickly and talk about supporting rights that are part of your appurtenance rule. So whenever you have a piece of land, let's just draw the surface of the land here, and this will be the property line, and this will be the property line, and we have three different parcels. We have parcel A, we have parcel B, and we have parcel C. Parcel A and parcel C are protected so that should the person who owns parcel B want to excavate and lower the grade on their land, if they want to do that, and we actually come over here and erase this grade here, there we go, that's good, erase that line, because the person who owns parcel B decided to excavate, maybe they're making a shopping plaza or something like that, the people who owned parcel A and parcel B, for instance, have a right to make sure that their land does not fall into the land of another. That is called lateral support. How do we solve that problem? We build a retaining wall. I'm sure you've seen them many times at shopping plazas and even in residential property. We build a retaining wall. A and C also have the right to make sure that B does not dig down, take a big bunch of land, soil from down here, so that A's land does not have like a sinkhole effect and move down here. That's called subjacent support. Subjacent support. So one is called lateral. This is the lateral here, and this is the subjacent support over here. So very, very important for the exam. You'll see that example, and in real life too, especially in commercial real estate. There are some things that we need to discuss in terms of what is exempt from certain things that are built into the property. Let's talk about that now. So one of the things we want to talk about are emblements. Emblements. Let's write that word down for you. Emblements. Still getting, oh, that's not my best B. There we go. I hope that's better. And the doctrine of emblements holds that even if a tenancy expires before harvest, the tenant may harvest and remove the crops he or she had planted. So this is a really, really old rule, and it basically means that you can go back and harvest your crops. I won't draw actually a crop. But you could come back and harvest your crop should you have planted it, even though your tenancy expired prior to the maturity of the crop. So that's a very important rule. Let's write that down again. Emblements. There's going to be some crops that you can harvest later, even if your tenancy has expired. Now that's going to be one of the exemptions to the real estate rule, because obviously you would say that a crop is a fixed feature, but if you take the idea of an apple, it drops from the tree. So a crop literally is the fruit of someone's labor, the fruit of your labor, and it's a good way to think about it, and therefore it would be exempt even if your lease expired before the fruit was ready to harvest. The next one is going to be that we have to decide to talk about is fixtures. Fixtures are sometimes exempt from the rule of what is real estate and what is not real estate. You have to look at the way the fixture is attached to the land. So in talking about fixtures, we have to look at how they're built into the property. First off, there's basically 5 tests that we have to look at. We have to look at the method by which they're attached. Are they permanently affixed? We have to look at the adaptability. In other words, can it be used elsewhere? Can it be used elsewhere? That's sort of how you spell elsewhere, isn't it? You can make fun of my spelling. It's okay. I can't spell. Next, we have to talk about the relationship between the parties. How are they related? Is it landlord and tenant? For instance, if a tenant adds something to the property, there's a implication that they intend to remove that item at the end of their lease, where if a landlord adds something to the property, there's an implication that they did that to increase the value of the property. Then we have to look at the intent. Ooh, that's a slippery slope, because we're looking at whether or not somebody actually wanted to, what they wanted to do with the item, and that's a little slippery slope because you have to look into literally the mind's eye of the person. What did they mean to do? And then, of course, we have to look at the parties. And I don't mean like a party that you go to on Friday night. I mean whether or not the parties themselves can decide whether or not it's real estate or personal property. All these other 4 tests might indicate that it's real estate, but if the parties can agree to treat it as personal property, then that's fine too. That happens actually quite a bit. Now let's not get confused between a fixture and a trade fixture. These are two different things. It's very important to remember that a fixture could definitely be considered real estate, but a trade fixture, can't draw it, but that's a barbershop chair if you weren't sure. And of course, a barbershop chair is bolted into the ground at the barbershop, isn't it? A trade fixture like this, something that someone derives their living from, would be considered personal property. That's an important exemption when we have a barbershop right outside our office here. And I always mention that it's a perfect example, a trade fixture. It's somehow they derive their living from the barbershop chair, and therefore to be exempt from the rule that it would be real estate, because it's bolted in down here at the base. And if it would be bolted in down at the base, you would could conceive of it being real estate, but because it's the way the tenant makes their living through the trade, then they can remove it at the end of their lease. Having said that, nowadays, for the most part, most of these things are all predetermined by writing, but these are rules that have been handed down for a long time, and so you should know what they are in the general concepts for the exam, but also in practice. Nowadays, in the modern age of 2016, 2017, most of these things are going to be written down as part of the lease when it's pre-established. So let's continue on and talk about the physical characteristics of land. The physical characteristics of land. Well, first off, some of these are self-evident, of course, but it's immobile. You can't pick up a piece of land, put it in your pocket, and take it someplace else. It is where it is. So, number one, physical characteristic of land, it's immobile. Number two, it's indestructible, or indestructibility of land. Yes, it can be altered, whether it's from mining or erosion or a number of different processes, but it's you can't change where it is. It is where it is, and it cannot be destroyed by definition. It can be altered. Even for instance, piece of land can be significantly altered by grading equipment. You name it, but it is where it is, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And it's unique. That's an important characteristic of land. You know, you can't move it, and it's not the same as any other parcel. One parcel is where it is, and all the other parcels are where they are. And while we will learn in another concept when we talk about appraisals that there is some comparable qualities of certain parcels, the one thing that one parcel is that it can never be and never is another parcel. It's always unique in and of itself, even though it can be occasionally interchanged with another parcel, but one parcel is itself and it's unique. So that's a very important aspect, and now we need to move on and talk about the economic characteristics of land. Okay, so for economic characteristics of land, we first have to talk about the area. It's the desirable aspect of whether or not someone actually wants to live in that general area. Going along with that would be how easy it is to find a parcel of land in that area. Of course, that's going to be scarcity, and that goes directly in relationship to the supply and demand of parcels in that area. And of course, we have improvements, whether or not we have, how should we say, buildings on that property or buildings in the nearby vicinity. Those are improvements. And the last economic concept relative to land is the fact that most of the type of improvements that are going to be on the property or in the neighboring areas are going to be long-term permanent improvements. They're fixed. They're not fluid. It's not like a pop tent. There's a house, for instance, and it's a long-term improvement involving a significant expenditure of capital. All right, so if we have some characteristics of land hammered down, both the physical characteristic and the economic characteristics, one of the more important things that we need to take a look at about land is the legal description. What actually are you buying? And I think the best way to start to think about this is, or I should say, what are you not only buying, but what are you selling? What are your clients buying? What are your clients selling? I think of the modern day description of this is kind of like the barcode. When you go into a store, everything has a barcode nowadays. Land does not come with the barcode, so we have to actually define it so that we know exactly what is being involved in the transaction. So one of the relatively straightforward ways to do that would be called a recorded map description. And this one's fairly straightforward, where things are broken down into lot and blocks and tracts, and the town, for instance, or more likely going to be a small section of a town, like a subdivision, is going to be broken down by in a recorded map format. The more advanced version of that, or larger scale version of that, would be the rectangular survey. I'm going to draw a couple of details about the rectangular survey in just a second. And the last one is kind of the old-fashioned one that is used quite around here quite a bit in Massachusetts, and that's called metes and bounds. Let's take a little bit deeper look into the rectangular survey and then into metes and bounds. A rectangular survey is a way to chop up or divide, I should probably say, a very large piece of land. This is unusual to use this, say, out in the Midwest, where things are incredibly uniform and flat, for instance. And what they'll do is take a large piece or section of the state, and they'll divide it into a square, which is 6 square miles. 6 square miles, and that would be basically a township. Then they'll subdivide it thereafter into smaller sections, as you can see here. We'll draw some more here, lines, just to kind of give you the idea. I know these are not proportional. Then they'll draw it into smaller sections like this. There you go. And you get the idea. This line goes across here. And if we continued on, we'd be drawing this into 36 equal little parcels, which would be 1 square mile each. And, of course, 1 square mile is 640 acres. That's probably a number that you want to have ingrained for yourself on the exam. 640 acres is 1 square mile. Now, you might have to do some math. This is a great way to bring some math into the exam. You should probably also know that 43,560 square feet is 1 acre. I'd say that those are some things that you want to write down right now and get those into your head for the exam. That's 43,560 square feet is 1 acre, and 640 acres equal 1 square mile. So this is a very common method to divide. If you were dividing up a large state that was relatively uniform in its land characteristics, you'd divide it into townships by 6 by 6 square miles, very simple, and then break it on down from there into 36 1 square mile segments. Fairly straightforward. The next aspect of measuring land that we mentioned before is the old metes and bounds system. I love the metes and bounds system. It's what we typically use here in Massachusetts. And because Massachusetts land is, well, how should we say this? One of a kind, I guess we should say. oftentimes we start at what we call a point of beginning, POB, and the old meets and bounds system is relatively straightforward. It tells you to start at some type of known point, like a survey marker, for instance, and head off in one particular direction, a meet, in a certain number of feet, which is known as a meet, for a certain direction, which is known as a bound. And then when you get to that point there, when you've gone in the compass direction, that's the bound for so many feet, which is the meet, then you go off and hit another point like this, and then you go off and hit another point like this, maybe even a zig and a zag and a zig and a zag again, because New England land tends to be a little bit uniform, unlike the rectangular survey that we just talked about. But nonetheless, eventually you get back to the point of beginning, and that's a very common way to measure land in the Massachusetts area. You're going to see it all the time, the meets and bounds survey. It's the oldest method of land, really, measurement, but we use it all the time, and it always starts with a point of beginning, sometimes referred to as a POB, the point of beginning. You're going to need to know that for the exam. All of those types of measurements are going to be on the exam. But no matter what method you use to actually measure or determine or define the property, the most important usage of that definition is to make sure that you delineate without any question and identify the piece of property. Therefore, you can assert your ownership to it in a court of law. Of course, you can't assert your ownership to something if you can't define what it is. Doesn't that make sense? So that's why we use the meets and bounds system, or the rectangular survey, or the recorded map system when we define land, so that should there be a question about who owns what, we can actually look at these definitions, the barcode, as we said, and determine exactly what piece of land is what and who it belongs to, or at least we can start that process. Now, when we have lands, sometimes we have certain rights that go with it, and those rights include air rights above the land, certain water rights, and certain mineral rights. So these are incredibly important concepts for the exam and for real life. So let's take a little bit look at what we call air rights. Now, I think the best way to think about it, and this will be an awful drawing for you, but for those of you who are familiar with Interstate 90 in downtown Boston, the Massachusetts Turnpike, the cars travel here. This is a car. Yeah, that's a car. There we go. And there's some headlights on the car. The cars travel down below, but basically in many areas of the Massachusetts Turnpike extension, there's these pillars, basically, that there's a deck built above the turnpike. So the cars travel down here, like that. Yep, there you go. And the government, usually the government is involved in leasing the airspace, which is up here. And sometimes they may lease this airspace up here so that private developers can then build buildings. And that's exactly what happens, for instance, in an example like the Massachusetts Turnpike area. Very common for the government to lease space above a transportation corridor like a highway or a railroad. So one of the more largest versions of that is going on in New York City, for instance, in the Hudson Yards development, where they're basically building a giant platform over a railroad yard, and a new development is going in above it. For those of you who might remember the proposed or short-lived Olympics proposal, over in White Circle over in the South Boston area. There was a proposal to have the Olympic Stadium at that location, and then after the Olympics was done, they were going to lease the airspace above it to developers to build a complex of housing and shopping and whatnot above it, so that the trains could still travel below. It was going to be an incredibly aggressive complex, and that's what we call about leasing the airspace above it. And of course, any landowner has a reasonable amount of airspace rights above their property, notwithstanding, of course, any regulations by the federal government to use, the space way above their property to conduct air travel and whatnot. But for the most part, when we're talking about leasing airspace and air rights above your land, theoretically that is unlimited, yet it's still controlled by the police power of the state for interstate commerce and air travel and whatnot. So the other type of rights that you could get with your property are the water rights. And there are basically two type of water rights that I'd like to pass on for you. And they're so easy to get these two confused on the exam. And the first one is the riparian rights. And the riparian rights work like on a small body of water that is non-navigable. So if we have a pond and there's a house like this, theoretically, if their body of water is non-navigable, your rights extend for your riparian rights to the midpoint of the water. However, if the water is navigable, and fortunately for you, you won't have to determine whether a piece of water is navigable or not for the exam. You're not taking the Coast Guard exam, you're taking the real estate exam, so they'll probably tell you, or it will be self-evident. But in that case where it's navigable, your rights extend to the water's edge right there, whereas if it's non-navigable, they extend to the midpoint. And for this type of right, you're allowed to achieve a certain extraction of water for basic homeowner purposes, and so that you're not actually disturbing anybody else's right to the water, although local state laws are going to vary. So let's take a look at how it works with littoral rights. Yep, they're much better. I'll draw a little diagram here. Actually might change our pen color. If we have the ocean down here, there's the ocean, and we'll say it's low tide right now. At any beach that you go to, there's always going to be this, turn a little green here, little row of seaweed and rocks, of course, and that type of thing. And that's where the tide usually comes up to be. That's going to be called the mean high water mark. In this particular case here, your rights extend, if you had your house up here, there we go, your rights are going to extend to the mean high water mark if you live by a large body of water, for instance, an ocean, of course. And when the tide comes up, it's going to usually come to this spot here, and your rights as the landowner usually go to this point here. So if you're traveling left to right here below the mean high water mark, you are technically not interfering with the littoral rights of the property owner here. The other set of rights that you get when you own a piece of property are mineral rights. And with mineral rights, there are basically two types of minerals that we're talking about. There's solid material, for instance, like granite or coal or diamonds even. And those are real property, and you own the right within the footprint of the property that you own to extract those. And of course, when you extract them, they get converted from real property to, of course, personal property when you extract them. And those rights to extract the solid aspect of mineral rights from the land transfer when you transfer the piece of land. Now, the next type of mineral rights are liquids, and liquids are a little bit trickier, and the laws do vary state to state under what's called the law of capture. The law of capture, I'm going to draw you a diagram for this in a quick second. It's important to note that not every state adheres to the law of capture, but you should know it for the exam. And every state that does adhere to the law of capture adheres to it probably in a different way. But let's just draw you a quick diagram so we can get an understanding of what the law of capture is and how it applies to your mineral rights. Before I do that, I just want to make a quick note that your mineral rights are something that you can actually sell and sever from the bundle of rights that you get when you buy a piece of land. Ooh, that sounds like a good question, doesn't it? You can actually sever the mineral rights from the ownership of the surface rights of the land. Ooh, that does sound like a good test question. Let's draw you that picture for law of capture. So law of capture, I'll write that back up here at the top, law of capture. And let's go back to our basic drawing where we have 3 property owners. There we go. This probably looks familiar to you. We have property owner B, A, B, and C, right? So let's just say there's a big blob of really good oil or something like that, way down below. Now, you could make an argument that property owner A owns this section, property owner B owns the vast majority here in the middle, and that property owner C owns this section over here. But under the law of capture, these items are not treated in that manner. Property owner C can go down, straight down on their property, drill down, and drill is basically a big, huge straw, right? And property owner C can suction up all of this stuff, oil, send it up to the top, and when property owner C does that, they then are going to convert this oil from real estate into personal property, which can then be sold on the open market, of course. And in this particular case, A and B are out of luck. They're out of luck. They're out of luck because they didn't take advantage of getting the oil from down here, even though it was directly under their property. So the law of capture is one of those things that you can, how should I say this, incentivize the property owner to drill and to extract the resource as quickly as possible. Now, here in Massachusetts, I don't think we have a lot of people drilling for oil or that type of thing, but this is on the general portion of the exam, which, remember, is given in many, many locations throughout the United States. And it's a good rule to know. You should be aware of the law of capture. And it is most certainly adapted in many different ways in different parts of the country. If we were teaching real estate school in Oklahoma or someplace like that, we'd probably be talking about the law of capture for a significant period of time. I did have somebody in class not too long ago that was from North Dakota, which has seen a oil boom and now bust. It was very interesting, their take on the law of capture. So let's go on and talk about different types of encumbrances and things that can be a burden to a particular ownership of a property. So when you own a piece of property, you may have an encumbrance placed against the property, an encumbrance. I think the best and easiest way to think about an encumbrance is if you have $1,000 in your checking account and you write a check for $100, then do you still really have $1,000 in your checking account? No, you have $900 because $100 has been encumbered. It's spoken for, I think, is the best way to think about it. While temporarily you might see $1,000 in your account, sooner or later it's going to be $900 in your account. So that's what encumbrances are. And it's very, very important. We're going to talk about a number of different types of encumbrances, but know from a practical point of view or a book type learning definition, it's a right or an interest held by someone other than the property owner in the property. So when we talk about encumbrances, oftentimes we're going to be talking about types of liens. L-E-I-N. And we have two types of liens. We have the voluntary lien, not the type that comes from Tennessee, and we have the involuntary lien. So a voluntary lien would be, for instance, like a mortgage, something that you entered into voluntarily. You supposedly you signed the paperwork of your own volition, and an involuntary lien may have been because you owe somebody some money. And that can happen too, right? So these are the two type of liens that are out there. And subderivative of this, of course, is going to be that some of these liens are going to be general lien, and that means it's going to be on all your property, personal or real estate. And the other one is going to be a specific lien, which is going to be just on the real estate only. This is usually going to be especially, well, most of your liens are going to be specific when we're talking about real estate, but sometimes you have a tax lien, for instance. That could be a general lien. That's a good example of one. And the other type of general lien that is good example is going to be some type of judgment. So, if you go to court and you owe a huge judgment, then you might also be liened against all your property, personal and real estate. But most of your specific liens are going to be dealing with just the real estate itself. So let's take a look at the type of voluntary liens and involuntary liens. I think the voluntary lien is pretty simple. Your voluntary lien is going to be your mortgage for the most part, right? For the most part, it's going to be your mortgage. Going down the list of involuntary liens are going to be judgment liens, which we just mentioned, of course. Judgment. Someone takes you to court and you owe a bunch of money, whether or not it's some type of civil judgment or a credit card debt or something like that. Then, of course, there's going to be property tax liens. Now, if you don't pay your property taxes, the government is going to come by and put a lien on your property. So you make sure you pay that property tax. Most people pay their property tax. Not everyone, but most people pay their property tax in the form of a withholding that the mortgage company collects every month, and then they pay the quarterly taxes on your behalf. I always get startled when I open the quarterly property tax bill in the mail, and then I like, oh my gosh, I owe this much money. And then, of course, I remember that I've already paid it on a monthly basis, and they're just sending me basically the statement. Special assessment. Special assessment, let me just write this out here for you. There we go. Special assessment is something that is going to be applied because usually the town accomplished some type of betterment. That's probably what would we call a type of betterment would be, I don't know, they put in maybe a sewer system that's going to be targeted to a particular neighborhood. So they will place a lien on the property, which you pay off over the long term. Betterments are like sewers, sidewalks, street lights, that type of thing. Also, we have involuntary liens, federal taxes. So if you don't pay your federal taxes, they're going to obviously come and, I don't know, oops, we just lost our page, but if we don't pay your federal taxes, you're going to have a lien against your property. Let's see if we can go back there and get that page back. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. So misspelt federal down here for you. You know what I meant down here. There we go. Federal taxes. Oh, let's just write the abbreviation, our favorite three letters, IRS, right? Okay. So, and then there's the mechanics lien. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with your automobile. It has to do with home improvement companies, for instance, that do work at your home, and then they are still owed money. So you, how should we say this politely, stiffed a contractor. One of their routes to go forward and get paid for their project is to put a mechanics lien on the property. So whenever you sell the property sometime in the future, you have to pay off the lien. Now, not everyone gets paid off at the same time or in the same order. That's very, very important. Let's talk about lien priority. When discussing lien priority, we always have to lean upon the, no pun intended, rule first to record, first to write, which means that if you just think about it as a line of people, and if there's $100,000 at stake, if the mortgage company is due, I don't know, $95,000, and they're the first to record, they're going to get paid all of their $95,000. If there's a second mortgage on the property, let's just say for $6,000, the second mortgage company is only going to get $5,000. Too bad for you, because you're in the second position of order. It's just basically like a line of people, and of course the second mortgage company is going to take a $1,000 loss, and this would be technically a short sale, which we'll get to later. But the lien priority rule works just like that. First to record, first to write, which means that whoever's in the beginning of the line gets paid off first, and whoever's further down the line, well, you know what happens to them. They don't get paid off if there's a deficiency in the total amount that is resulting from the transaction. So, very important rule, the lien priority rule. First to record is always going to be, with some exceptions, of course, for your taxes, because the government's always going to get paid the first to write. All right, so let's talk about some easements and some licenses. Sometimes you're going to be having an easement. So an easement is probably a phrase you've heard before. The most common type of easement is a utility easement. And something that we also deal with on a daily basis is the shared driveway easement. So if we have two pieces of land stacked upon each other like this, and this is the street down here, and here's the house here, and here's the house here, sometimes something like this will have a shared driveway where the driveway goes up and then there, and then it also continues up until here. In this particular case here, this is going to be the dominant tenement, and this will be the subservient tenement. And the reason why is because this subservient tenement here must always keep the road, so to speak, clear. They cannot artificially block the road so that the people that live in the house farthest from the street, this always we'll use green to represent, this always must be green. They cannot artificially block it off. Now, these people that are the dominant tenement, they may have to remove a natural accumulation of snow, for instance, but the dominant tenement always gets the green light, if you want to think about it that way, in a situation where we have a dominant tenement in a subservient tenement. Now, occasionally we'll have an easement on non-abutting parcels where the parcel, we have one parcel here, and disconnected from it, non-contiguous, we have another parcel several parcels away. This is going to be called an easement in gross. An easement in gross. This is here is going to be a dominant and a subservient tenement. Easement aperient. Ooh, there's another tricky French word. We're going to spell that out for you down here at the bottom of the page. Easement aperient. That's from ease of use, if you can translate that, if you happen to have taken French before. There we go. Easement apurient. You can almost see the word tenant right in there. There you go. So two different types of easements that you need to know for the exam and for real life. One's an easement in gross, typically on non-abutting land, and the other one is an easement apurient, where we have abutting properties, and one is going to be the dominant tenement, and the other one is going to be the subservient tenement. All right, so let's take a look at some subversions of easements. Actually, I misspoke there when I said subversions of easements. What I meant to say is a different type of right altogether, and that's called a license. A license is just simply a personal revocable permission, a personal revocable permission. So, in fact, when you look at your ticket to a sporting event, when you look at the ticket to a sporting event, you flip it over and you read that small print back there on the back side that no one ever reads. Not only does it say rain delay or rain check, but it's also somewhere in the fine print is going to say that you have a license to sit in that seat for the event that is on the back of the ticket. So it's just a personal, non-transferable temporary permission. That's all a license is. It's temporary permission. And the opposite thing of temporary permission is called an encroachment. So if this is the property line here and someone decides to I don't know, widen their driveway over the property line and then plant some trees here along the property line, that's going to be called an encroachment. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a driveway or trees. It could be even an extension of a building. Anything like that is going to be an encroachment, something that was done without the permission. So the people that own this property here aren't going to be too happy with their friendly neighbor over here. That's why you always want to build your fence, for instance. You never build your fence right on the property line. You always build your fence a little bit off the property line. Otherwise, you could be susceptible to being saying that you had an encroachment. Encroachment sounds like a football play. That's actually the same definition, right? Encroachment. You can't go offside, so to speak. You can't cross the line. The line is the line. There is no land between my land and your land. There's just the line. Sometimes encroachments are discovered, or how should we say, enforced through the process by which someone comes over here and actually finds out where the line is. For instance, the line actually may be here. Even though the preconception of the line was a little bit farther that way, we would only know that through a survey. A survey that would usually be paid for by one or both of the parties. Importantly, for a survey, the surveyors are obliged to do the survey in a neutral fashion, no matter who actually pays their fee. Well, we've talked for quite some time about the different types of benefits and rights that you get by ownership. Let's talk about the different types of actual ownership. We have two basic types of ownership. One is freehold. That's an interesting word, is it? And the other one is non-freehold. Non-freehold. And the essential difference between one and the other is how long the length of time of ownership, how long the ownership is. So for freehold, that's basically infinity. I don't know if I can draw that. And theoretically, for freehold, the type of ownership that you get is for infinity, or until you want to transfer it. And non-freehold is going to be limited. So in a non-freehold estate, it's basically possession. You don't own the property. You don't have title to it. You're going to have possession to it. And if this starts to sound like renting, that would be a great way to think about it. Non-freehold estate is effectively renting because you have possession. By the word, that phrase non-freehold estate, that's a funny one, huh? You're probably never going to use that in real life, but you'll absolutely positively need to know it for the exam. You're not going to sit down and talk to someone about their non-freehold tenancy at will, but you will, of course, need it for the exam. So basically, it's possession for a limited amount of time, where a freehold, oftentimes referred to as a fee or a life estate. There's two different types of freehold. We're going to go into those right now. Either one of those is theoretically for infinity, but we'll see for a second how that isn't actually true either. So one of the types of freehold estate is the fee simple absolute. The fee simple absolute, and it is the best and highest form of ownership, and it's assumed that you own something in fee simple absolute, unless, of course, it is determined by the deed that you don't. So there's an assumption that everything is owned in fee simple unless otherwise determined or spelt out. There must be a determination that it's not fee simple. So by default, fee simple is the way things are owned. So in regards to fee simple, you can have fee simple that are subject to certain conditions. It's not as how should we say, universal or what's the word I'm looking for? It's definitely subject to different conditions, including claims of ownership by the government if you don't pay your taxes and that type of thing. But what I really wanted to say is that there are derivatives of fee simple derivatives. Sorry about that. I just lost my train of thought there for a quick second. Fee simple derivatives. One is the condition subsequent. And this one here is the cousin of another one called fee simple determinable. And these are a little bit different. Let's take a quick look at these for you. Fee simple condition subsequent means that you've gotten title upon the condition that a certain activity does not occur in the future. So, for instance, you might have taken title and agreed never to have a liquor license on the property. That's a kind of a textbook example of a fee simple with a condition subsequent. Yes, we'll buy it from you, but we will not have a liquor license here on the property. By the way, that condition subsequent passes down to anybody else that owns it too, and if they don't adhere to that, then the estate could be what we call defeasible. And if you think the definition of that word is because it sounds like to be defeated, that's exactly what we mean by it. There are some versions of fee simple that are defeasible, and these are defeasible conditions. One in which you can't do something in the future, and the other one is that you must do something in the future. So another example of something that would be determinable would be like open space or green space. In fact, there's a piece of property in the town of Woburn granted to the city of Boston, which must be green space or open space, must remain a park, and it still is even to this day, even though it's incredibly valuable. So fee simple absolute does have some limitations if it's defeasible by these conditions, condition subsequent or condition determinable. Now, the second form of freehold estate is the life estate. And there are basically three types of life estates. Let's break them down for you. And just like it sounds, these are type of estate planning tools. So the first one is called an estate in reversion, a life estate in reversion, where person A grants an estate to person B, and for as long as B lives. When B passes away, the estate goes back to person A. Person B is known as the life tenant, and they must pay the taxes, and they cannot commit waste. Waste, which you'll hear about from time to time in the class, is damage to the property beyond wear and tear. This is known as a life estate in reversion. A life estate in reversion. Remember, this is all going to be set up by A and B in advance, and it's a way that you can manage assets, seek legal advice for sure, but it's one of the type of life tenancies. Let's take a look at the second type of life tenancy. They get a little bit trickier as time goes on. And there's probably many derivatives of life tenancy, but for this exam, you only need to know really these three. So A grants a life tenancy to B, just like before, and then at the end, when B passes away, X takes over. This is known as life estate in remainder. Life estate in remainder. So usually, excuse me, let me respeak. All of these three people are probably involved in the setting up of the life tenancy. And again, life tenancy occurs and concludes at the end of the life of B, who is known as, again, the life tenant. And once again, of course, they have to pay the taxes, and they cannot commit waste. Now, the third one is a little bit trickier to pronounce. It's per atrophy. It's for the life of another, and basically it works like this. Person A, who owns the estate, sets up a life tenancy for person B for the life of another. So this starts off the same, but there's another person down here. We'll just call them person Q. And so A grants to B a life tenancy. However, they only get it for as long as Q lives. When Q passes away, X takes over. This is known as life estate for the life of another, Let's get you the French words for that so we can spell it out so that you don't get it wrong on the exam. That's known as per my French isn't that good. Per atrophy for the life of another. Either way, let me just say it for you again. Person A grants a life estate to person B. B gets it. They're the life tenant, but they only enjoy the life tenancy for as long as Q lives. When Q passes away, then X becomes the remainder man. Okay, that's what per atrophy, or for the life of another, life estate is all about. Okay, let's talk about forms of ownership. These are forms of ownership. First one is severalty. Severalty, where we have one owner. Doesn't that make sounds a funny word, huh? Severalty. When there's one person, it's severalty. Well, that's because what we're really trying to say is we've severed the rights. That's where they get the word, that's the derivative, where they've severed the rights to this particular property from any other rights of any other owner. And so that's where we get the word, even though it sounds a little funny. When someone owns property all by their lonesome, it's said to be owned in severalty. Then, of course, we have some other forms of, there we go, we did it again. There we are. We have some other forms of multi-party ownership, joint ownership, or co-ownership. All mean the same thing. It's ownership by several parties, and there are many different derivatives of this, and we're going to talk about several of them right now in class. Let's talk about them. Before we just move on, I just want to drive home the part that owning something all by yourself with one owner is said to be owning something in severalty. Let's go on and talk about multi-party ownership now. So the most common type of multi-party ownership, well, I don't know if it's the most common, but it is fairly common. It's tenancy by the entirety. Tenancy by the entirety. So don't get confused in this portion of the exam when we, in this portion of the class, or in this portion of the exam for that matter, when we use the word tenancy, because we're not talking about tenancy from a rental point of view. We're talking about tenancy by an ownership point of view. These are forms of ownership after all. Tenancy by the entirety, this is reserved for married couples, And the most important part of this or this type of multi-party ownership is that it has survivorship. And let's talk about what that particularly means. We're going to draw you a picture up for you. So in tenancy by the entirety, if the ownership group looks like this, Party A and Party B, and unfortunately Party B passes away, then the new ownership group is automatically going to be Party A. And so Party B goes away, and automatically Party B goes away, and automatically the new ownership group is just simply Party A. And so that was very common in a marriage where one spouse passes away, and now the new ownership group is just person A. So that's fairly straightforward. That's called tenancy by the entirety, and that is a form of multi-party ownership, co-ownership, however you want to phrase it. Now, the other one is going to be, well, actually, there's a couple of them here. Tenants in common, or tenancy in common. And if we have a tenancy in common, we'll draw the ownership group like this. If this is the ownership group, A and B own the property together. When B dies, the new ownership group becomes the A and the heirs of B. See how that works? So A didn't take over entirely like they do under the tenants in common version. Instead, the new ownership group is going to be A, who was always there before, and the heirs of B. This is under tenants in common. All right, and the other part of multi-party ownership that we want to cover for you right now is joint tenancy. I don't see many of these out there, but they do exist, and it's absolutely going to be on the exam. Joint tenancy works in a where they've all these conditions have to have taken place. They've had to take possession simultaneously with time. They have to have a unity of interest and a unity of title. Basically, that means that they have all had to take title on the same deed and at the same time, and they have to own the property equally. In this particular case, this is what we call joint tenancy. There has to be equal possession, taken at the same time by equal deed, and there has to be equal ownership. So these unities must be achieved in order to have joint tenancy. Important to note that, of course, and I did mention this, but this must all occur at the same time as well. With joint tenancy, you also get the right of survivorship. So it could be a situation where you have an ownership group like this, and there's, I don't know, maybe brothers and sisters, and they own a vacation cottage, for instance, where, D passes away, C passes away, and B passes away, and the final sibling ends up to own the whole thing all by themselves. That might be very unpopular with the rest of the family, but you do occasionally see a joint tenancy in a situation where you're purchasing a vacation property. Okay, so we've talked about the types of freeholds. Let's talk about the types of leaseholds. And we're going to get into leasing in different segments of the lessons. But for this portion, we should just focus on the fact that we have basically 4 types of leaseholds. The first one is a tenancy of years, and it's renting for a fixed period of time. I think that's the important part here. So this would be mostly your basic lease, where there is a certain start and an end date. Periodic, which we don't usually see very often, but in practice, it is something that continues for a period, whether it's some type of period, and it can be terminated by notice. Then, of course, there's tenancy at will, which can be terminated by usually a 30-day notice. That's how that works. And tenancy by sufferance. This is someone who's basically overstayed, or somebody that exists in the property beyond their lease term, for instance. It could eventually become someone that's a squatter in the property, but somebody who's stayed beyond and obtained legal possession, a holdover tenant, that could be somebody like that, a holdover tenancy at sufferance. So that exists too. We're going to get back into leasing at a different time, but I want to end this lesson number 1, when we've been talking about property, with the discussion of 2 very important aspects, and that's condominium versus co-op. So here in Massachusetts, we tend to be a predominantly condo state as opposed to co-op. But we do have plenty of co-ops in Massachusetts, but we definitely have more condos than anything else. And condos are multi-party ownership. I guess you could kind of think about it that way. It's basically a common interest in property. So I find it the best to draw 2 diagrams to kind of demonstrate how this works. So for a condo kind of works like this, where you have a master deed. Draw these. There we go. A master deed. And the master deed defines how the condo association shall be run. But each little condo itself has its own little deed. And so as long as they adhere to the rules of the master deed, these little condo units in this 6-unit condo that we just built here are kind of little islands of to themselves. If they want to sell, for instance, they can sell without seeking anyone's approval at the condo association up here. So very important. This is how a condo works. The condo association members must adhere to the master deed, but if they want to sell, then they're free to do so. A co-op is significantly different. A cooperative is significantly different. There's basically one big deed. Oh, that was an awful circle, but you'll get the idea. And basically, when you buy into a co-op, it's like buying into a joint venture, a business venture. And we'll just say this is the co-op for number 1. Basically, it's like owning stock in a company or a joint business venture. So there's just one deed. And since whoever is letting you buy into this business, and they are letting you buy into the business, even if the seller is happy with you, the buyer, the people at the co-op board still have to approve you, because you're going to be entering into their basically a joint business. And when they do so, you're going to be highly likely you're going to be jointly and severably liable for the debt and for the obligations, we should say, and therefore you're going to have to be approved by the co-op board. This is a rather unusual thing that we have in Massachusetts. We don't have many of them, but you may have mentioned, if you've seen Sex and the City, you've seen Carrie Bradshaw do this. You've seen probably quite a few people in New York do this in different movies and television. And we definitely have co-ops in Massachusetts. For instance, one of the most predominant co-ops that I know of is the co-op in Boston. Just on the right-hand side, as you head into the Tip O'Neill Tunnel, the meat distributors over at the New Market, development. There's a bunch of buildings over there where there's the fish and poultry and meat and distributorships. That's actually a co-op. We've come into significant prominence when the Olympics proposal was on the table some years ago. So we don't typically do co-ops here in Massachusetts. We do have some of them. They are legal, but we most certainly do condos. Now, the downside to going with a co-op, a co-op is because that you have to go to the co-op board to get approved. And let me say that again. That's because you're entering basically into a joint venture with the people that already are owning into the co-op building. To make a long story short, co-ops are becoming less popular for luxury buildings in New York because you have to show up to the co-op board and basically get interviewed. And a lot of foreign investors don't care for that because that means they might have to face some questions and or actually identify themselves as to the true buyer. The true buyer needs to be disclosed. Whereas if you buy a condo, you can still buy a condo with not having to disclose your or show up through the to the condo board, and you can buy it through your limited liability company, in which may have 3 layers or more to the number of layers of actually who owns or who's buying the condo. And the IRS has in the last year, late 2015, early 2016, put some restrictions upon real estate agents, making sure that on certain sales, the lawyers and the real estate agents handling any transaction in the preliminary rule is in Manhattan and in Dade County. That's over a certain dollar figure. I think it's like $2 million. They have to actually go out of their way to identify the real estate agent, identify the real buyer. The lawyer and the real estate agent has to go out of their way to identify the real buyer, because what we found and what the IRS has found, and the New York Times did a huge story on this, is that buyers were taking foreign money and investing it into New York Manhattan real estate, for instance, and basically using that asset with that purchased in order to wash the money, to launder the money. And so now the IRS has put in these new recommendations or requirements that started off just being applicable in Manhattan and Dade County, and probably will eventually spread nationwide over a certain dollar figure, that the true buyer must be revealed. So when we've been talking about all of everything for lesson number 1, basically we've outlined the important property ownership aspects, and we've detailed at length the bundle of rights that you get when you buy a property, and sometimes the obligations that you get when you buy a property. So this has been lesson number 1. Again, my name's Jack Gately. I'm the instructor and the owner, and I'm also a licensed real estate broker in Massachusetts. Thank you for watching lesson number 1, and soon we'll go on to lesson number 2.